It seems that the first Club World Cup has gotten the green light for June 2028. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down exactly what the Club World Cup is, which teams are involved, how they qualify, and the problems that I have with this format of competition. So what is the Club World Cup? Well, essentially, it's the best club teams in rugby from around the world that come together every 4 years in June for the first time in 2028, and they compete to see who the best club in rugby is within the world. Now, starting off, they're going to have 8 teams from the Champions Cup. They're going to have 6 teams from Super Rugby and 2 from the Japanese League. Now, how are these teams from the Champions Cup, Super Rugby, and Japanese League going to qualify for the Club World Cup? Well, in those years when it's a Club World Cup, so in 2028, there won't be a winner of the Champions Cup, the Investec Champions Cup that's busy going on now. What will happen is the teams that qualify for the quarterfinals, so those 8 teams that qualify, will then qualify for the Club World Cup. So instead of playing the quarterfinals, semis, and finals in the Champions Cup, they'll move on into the Club World Cup. Those 8 teams that then lose the round of 16 games in the Champions Cup move down and compete in the Challenge Cup. So the Challenge Cup will get a little bit of a reformat with those 8 teams dropping out and moving into the Challenge Cup. But how the teams from the URC, the top 14, the Premiership qualify for the Club World Cup at the moment is by making the quarterfinals of the Champions Cup. They then get blended together with Super Rugby teams, 6 Super Rugby teams. So I'm assuming they're just going to take the top 6 Super Rugby sides from that Super Rugby season, and then I'm assuming they're going to take the 2 top Japanese sides from League One in Japan. Guys, just before we carry on with this video, about 92% of you that watch this channel on a regular basis are not subscribed. My goal is to get that down to 50%. The more of you that subscribe, the better these videos can get. So if you don't mind, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, and let's get back to the video. So that all sounds good. We're going to have the Bulls potentially playing against the Crusaders. We're going to have the Stormers playing against La Rochelle. We're going to have Japanese sides like the Cannon Eagles, who have Faf de Klerk, and a lot of South Africans play against other South African sides. So I do agree with this type of tournament. In terms of the teams that are going to be playing against each other, it's always good to see the best teams playing against the best teams in the world. There is a couple of problems that I have with this competition, which I'm going to dive into now, but I do think it is a great incentive. It gets the best teams playing against the best teams, it gets the best players playing against the best players, and it will be entertaining to watch. Now, there are a couple of problems with this. The first one being that this competition will take place in June. Now, for this season, the URC, the top 14, and the Premiership and the Super Rugby finals take place in June. So that whole season would have to get shifted forward to make space for the Club World Cup that'll take place on consecutive weekends in the month of June. This means that the Super Rugby season will have to start in January instead of February, and the exact same happens with the other competitions. Now, at the moment, the French, the top 14 sort of big bosses there still need to sign off on this. They've verbally sort of agreed to this, but they do need to sort of put in writing that the top 14 will get behind this to make amendments to their season to cater this competition. Now, moving all of these seasons forward also creates a little bit of a problem, because in 2027 we'll have a Rugby World Cup, and then just a couple of months later the domestic seasons will start. So having those international players have even shorter of an amount of break between the World Cup and the start of the regular season then plays into the workload. Can these players manage this amount of workload, manage another tournament? Yes, I get that they would have played the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the finals of the Champions Cup, but it's a whole nother competition that moves their whole season about a month forward. So it just gives the players a little bit less time to recover. There's been a lot of conversation around this in the Currie Cup within South Africa this year, in that the My Players Association are not comfortable with the Currie Cup being moved now between July and September, because the workload on the players, they don't get that off season that they would typically have. So workload is always going to be a discussion when these tournaments get made, and especially on the scale that they're getting made on. Another problem I have with this is the allocation of teams that can qualify for the Club World Cup at the moment. They're taking 8 from the Champions Cup, which includes France, which includes South Africa, Ireland, England, Wales, I mean, there's just a lot of teams within the Champions Cup, about 40. Then you look at Super Rugby, where there's only 12 teams and 6 teams get to qualify from Super Rugby. So 50% of the Super Rugby teams get to qualify, but only around 20% of the Champions Cup teams get to qualify. I just think there has to be a little bit of a better process to go about making sure that it's fair, that there's enough representation from each country. Now, I get that it's a Club World Cup and that not every nation needs to be involved, but what if they took 2 teams from the URC, 2 teams from the English Premiership, 2 from the top 14, 2 from Super Rugby, just so that we have more clubs from more places, so that there's more interest within the Club World Cup. There's nothing worse than a South African having to watch an Irish team take on an English team. You need representation from each country to make it more watchable for each country around the world. And this adds into my last point and why I think this is a problem, because you can't call it a Club World Cup and not include all the continents. They need to then include the American sides. American rugby is on the up is on the up at the moment. They need to include South American sides, maybe the Jaguars fall back into Super Rugby, and then they have a chance to qualify for the Club World Cup. But there needs to be at least a fair shot for teams in each continent to qualify for the Club World Cup. Now, this can start to sound a little bit like a Super League, and we've seen in the football world that when they've tried to put the Super League together of all the best club teams in the world, there's been major backlash, because then the minnows, the smaller clubs, don't get enough opportunity, and then they'll cease to exist. So whether this is a little bit of a Super League or if it's going to be treated more like a Club World Cup, we're still going to have to see, because inevitably the biggest teams are going to qualify for this. It is going to be the best rugby we will get to see at the club level every 4 years. So I'm pro for that. I just think there's a lot of problems that they need to sort out in terms of workload, scheduling, including more continents, including the right amount of teams from each country. So there's just a lot of things that they need to iron out. I'm sure they will in sort of the next 4 years or so as they prepare for this competition. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Are you for this? Are you against this? How should they go about running it, scheduling it, picking teams? If you haven't, also make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave this video a like, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take it easy. Peace.